Welcome to the Take the North podcast. I'm David Haugh from the Mully and Haugh Show on 670 The Score. Dan Wiederer from the Chicago Tribune covers the Bears. We are in the midst of summer. It's a dead period on the NFL calendar. There is plenty of stuff to talk about. The NFL never sleeps, and we'll talk about some things and break down some position battles. But Dan, this is the beginning of a time of year where you just really, if you're a fan of a team, if you are an employee, a coach, as we talked last, you don't want any headlines. You really don't want any controversy. You don't want any rumors. You want to look ahead to training camp and the beginning of that cycle without anything changing from the time you went away.
Yeah, and if your starting quarterback's going to do anything during summer break, you hope it's going to Europe to help kids learn football rather than going to a hallucinogenics clinic to talk about the value of hallucinogenics. I'm not speaking in any specific terms here. It'd just be my general rules for NFL quarterbacks.
Yeah, and you would like to have your NFL quarterback, especially your starter who was unproven, try to avoid making news on social media by wishing his rival's fan base a happy Father's Day. That would be recommended. But short of that, without the Packers and Aaron Rodgers to discuss or Jordan Love any longer, we'll focus on the Bears and Justin Fields, Matt Eberflus and company. There's plenty to get around to. I have some thoughts on some things. I know you do as well. But I think, first of all, we can start with the fact that there has been no movement as far as the edge rusher, the biggest, I think, personnel question, the roster question. There really hasn't even been many rumors, Dan. I think the Bears seem intent on waiting until they reconvene to see what other teams may do with their rosters before they address the biggest hole remaining on theirs.
Sure, and the other part of this is that even NFL general managers and front office people like to take vacation at this time of year, so they get away from it a little bit, and it'll probably be in the 10 days or so leading up to training camp that a little bit more activity is out there, perhaps even some chatter, and we'll keep tabs on that. I thought it'd be fun today, and this episode and then the following episode next week to go through the questions we have position by position about this Bears team as they get ready to report to training camp next month. I thought it'd be good to start with the defense. We can save the offense for a week from now and just kind of zero in, like I say, position by position on the biggest question I have at each position group. You can tell me whether you agree if it's the right question and what your answers to that is. But I guess starting out, you tell me, would you rather go back to front or front to back? Because I think it's sort of the pecking order of the level of concern there.
I think I would start. Let's start up front. Let's go front to back, starting with the defensive front, because I do think that when you talk about the Bears defense and how it will be defined, and we'll get to some of the evaluations of the linebacking core later, but how you look at the Bears defensively everything starts up front.
Which is what we talked about all through March and April, and here we are now still asking these questions. And so I'll start at the defensive end position, kind of touching on what you just talked about. I think the obvious question would be, who is it? Who's going to sign with the Bears? Who's going to be someone that can come in and help enliven that pass rush? Well, that leads me to my question of the person that they did sign, and it is DeMarcus Walker's bite as big as his bark? We talked last week about how he certainly talks a good game, and he's on his fourth team in 7 seasons. The Bears gave him $15.7 million guaranteed on a 3-year, $21 million deal, which is certainly a statement of belief that they think he can be a pass rushing weapon for him. And not just situationally like he was for the Titans and before that with the Texans and Broncos. And so my question there is for you, is DeMarcus Walker's bite as big as his bark?
I don't think that you can say the answer is yes. Yeah. I tend not to like, and that'll come out wrong. I don't always recommend players joining new teams regardless of the sport. When you see a player joining a new team who is maybe marginally qualified. And we're not talking about DeMarcus Walker is not a Pro Bowl pass rusher. He's not a Pro Bowl anything. He's not an all-star level player. If you are, then you join a new team and you sign a contract and it's a free agent thing. Be as bold as you want. So when a guy's talking bigger than he's playing, then I start to wonder exactly what you have in that player. I think he creates an unnecessary set of expectations and brings unwarranted attention on himself. So I don't know why the answer be, of course he's going to be, worth that, because right now I like guys who just play now, talk later.
Yeah,
And
and we'll see which direction it goes. The guy that this reminded me the most of, as we've kind of gotten to know DeMarcus Walker a little bit better through the spring, is Pernell McPhee. And Pernell McPhee was a guy who signed almost a similar deal coming over from the Ravens way back when, and he had $15.5 million guaranteed from the Bears on a 5-year, $38.8 million deal that he obviously didn't get to the end of. And McPhee was one of those guys who was a Wednesday and Thursday star. You'd go in the locker room and all the cameras would go to him and they would get your recorder out and you didn't want to miss what he was going to say because it was always going to be colorful. It was always going to be entertaining. It was always going to be full of passion. And you just loved having him in the locker room for the sake of doing our jobs. And then he missed a lot of games on the field because he was hurt. I think he missed 12 games during his 4 years with the Bears. And I think ultimately 14 sacks as a Chicago Bear, which is not what you pay for when you're giving a guy a 5-year, $38.8 million contract. And so DeMarcus Walker is going to have to make sure that's not who he is, that he produces more than just sound bites on Wednesday and Thursday, because the Bears are going to need a lot up front to get their defense humming.
but the question would be: was he like that in Tennessee? Was he like that with a previous, team and market? And I don't have any indication that. And talking to some people down there, I know some people in Nashville and somebody with the Titans. I think he was considered a solid guy, not necessarily somebody whose mouth wrote checks his body couldn't cash, as they say.
Yeah.
So this was a little bit of a surprise, but hey, it's early. The offseason, we focus on those things. He has one good game. He gets off to a good start and is a good piece of that part of that rotation. Nobody's going to care.
Well, look, and I remember talking to Mike Vrabel at the owners' meetings in March, and him really expressing his gratitude for having seen DeMarcus Walker have the breakthrough that he had in 2022. And so, the Bears love the passion; they love that edge and the ability to kind of, you know, give that edge to people around them. And they're hoping that tone setting energy is something that helps them in some way, shape, or form. We'll see when the games start being played what the production looks like. Obviously, we know they're at a position there, a group that needs more. Travis Gibson, Dominique Robinson are going to be pushed to try to have bigger years this year than they had a year ago. You've got Terrell Lewis in the mix, had some nice moments during OTAs and minicamp, and so now it is just about finding somebody on the edge that can give you that push.
Is there anybody? I mean, what are the other options? He's going to get a chance by default, really.
Oh,
Isn't
no
he?
question.
He's going to have to play. It just represents when they got him, I didn't think that he was going to be all. He's a complementary piece, but he's not the main piece, and that's why I think when you talk about this Bears defensive front and some of these expectations that we're seeing expressed about the Bears season overall, I hesitate only because there are so many questions that you could point out. We could spend the entire time talking about the Bears defensive line and go by player, and really the narrative would start to sound the same. I mean, and it's not being negative; it's being realistic that you have unproven guys who are going to get opportunities, but for them to succeed, they're going to all have to take advantage of them.
Perfect segue. We'll move inside to the defensive tackle position, because my biggest question at defensive tackle is how quickly can Jaquan Brisker and Zach Pickens make a significant impact. These are two guys that the Bears use day 2 draft picks on, hybrid defensive tackles that they're looking to get the most out of, guys that they think have not reached anywhere near their potential in college, and that they can squeeze even more out of them at the pro level. And so now it is, how quickly can that happen? And look, Jaquan Brisker is one of those guys, David, that you watch on the practice field and you see the traits. You understand why the Bears were attracted to that size, that athleticism, that kind of skill set. Well, now you kind of trying to convert him a little bit, and making him do things that he wasn't asked to do in college. And you're hopeful that not only can he make a significant impact as a rookie, but then he becomes a guy that becomes a second contract guy for you, 4 or 5 years down the road, and becomes a cornerstone of your defense.
Well, that's a good one. And whether it's Dexter or Pickens, I do think this about these guys. And I always hesitate when I refer to them, because I lump them. We almost talk about them as a tandem.
Collective. Yeah, agreed.
And it takes me back to, because I've been around here long enough to I remember we used to talk about Tommy Harris and Tate Johnson. Yep. Yeah, as a tandem. And so when I see these guys as a tandem, I think about, well, geez, if they could grow together and develop at a similar pace, the Bears really do have something here, or they could. And so, like, when I look at this season, I don't expect that to happen immediately, because over time, you think they will grow together and get better. So when I look at the defensive line and I look at like what is the what who is the guy that represents maybe the expectations that may be unrealistic from a veteran standpoint, I think the rookies are going to be good at some point. Those are investments over
Yep.
time. Andrew Billings is a guy that they signed with heavy expectations, and I think that
Heavy
I want
expectations. Nicely done there.
what do you have? What do you have there in him? And uh, I'm not sure, and I think that he could be a huge part of this defense. No pun intended there, but he
Yeah.
is a mountain of a man, and it just depends on his health, his ability to impact everyone else on that front on the front four and occupy attention. And I just don't know. I think Andrew Billings to me is as I'm as curious about his development as anybody because I do expect the rookies to eventually be pretty good.
Yeah, and Billings is going to be a guy that should be able to hold down the nose for you, and then when you get into your pass rushing downs, will come off the field and cede playing time to maybe two of these other guys. And it's really going to be interesting because you talk to defensive coaches inside the building, David, and when they talk about Dexter, they talk about the two gap system that he was asked to play at in Florida, and basically off the snap, moving horizontally with the offensive lineman, and now they're asking him to use that frame and that explosion and athleticism to go vertically, to get inside and dent the pocket and get after the quarterback. And they think that they can mold this guy, but right now he's just a raw block of clay that they've got to figure out what to do with. He's a kid that was a basketball player for a long time, and so has natural athleticism, natural footwork, but hasn't been playing football at a high level for a really long time. And so this is a real dice roll on traits. It's a real dice roll on coaching. And now you've got to figure out a way to squeeze the most out of this to help, again, a defensive front that is already lacking on the outside. And now you need to get some answers in the middle as well.
Neither one of us mentioned Justin Jones, and I do wonder what do you expect from Justin Jones this year because he's a guy that the Bears bristled when wondering about the three technique, saying they already had a guy. He certainly is a big talker and isn't afraid to say things and try to back them up. I don't know what to expect out of him because I just don't know that we saw enough in year one to be too overconfident heading into year two.
Yeah, I think Justin Jones is a decent starting defensive tackle, particularly at the three tech position going forward. And I don't have many questions about him because I'm not expecting grand accomplishments and I'm not expecting him to be a failure. He's just kind of one of those guys that what you're getting out of him week by week. And it's not always going to be jump off the TV screen impressive, but he's a guy that will start for you and hopefully bring some of these guys along and will just be a key piece in the machine until they find a better piece to go into the machine.
Big picture wise, you take a step back and you look at where the Bears are about almost 18 months into the Ryan Poles era, and he hired Matt Eberflus as his number one thing on his list of to-do things. He had a defensive-minded head coach, and we're still talking, heading into season two about the biggest questions being on the defensive line. And I didn't expect that. I think so. We're starting at the appropriate spot when we're talking about the roster and the questions that exist, because I think the biggest ones would remain edge rusher and the interior defense, your front four, if you will. And for a defensive-minded head coach who came here because of his success as a coordinator, I'm somewhat surprised that that's the reality because they have devoted so much attention and time and resources to the offense. I'm surprised that they have neglected the defense. They wouldn't use that verb. It's my word, not theirs. But I do think there are signs of neglect on the defensive front.
Yeah, neglect's a strong word for me. I think obviously they're at a period in their building process where you have to devote a lot of resources to getting your answer on the quarterback, and that'll be a huge conversation for next week. And to some extent, there's an expense that comes with that because you can't do everything all at once. The other part of when we talk about expenses, I'll use this as my transition to the linebacking core because my biggest question with the linebackers is what will be the return on investment in the linebacking core. You know what they did in March. More than $62 million in guarantees given out to Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards as guys that are going to be established veterans, expected to be major leaders, major building blocks for this defense. And I think you would probably agree that we say, okay, we can concur that these are good football players with established track records of being quality starters for good teams. But with the investment the Bears put in them, how much will they raise the defense? Because that's money that you pay to guys that you expect to raise the defense to a great level. And I have some serious questions about it.
Well, that's part of my broader point is that it's great to have linebackers, but I do think that we talk about the effect of pass rush on the secondary. I think that the strength of your linebackers is very directly related to the depth and dominance of your defensive line. And you can spend as much money as the Bears have spent on the linebacking core, but you're being evaluated, or they're being praised for signing guys and getting guys who are number one, probably known for their pass defense as linebackers, and they're being graded highly because of that. But I just don't know. You always want to put yourself in that situation. I think that the strength of the linebacking core, if it's going to be related to the strength of the people in front of them, they're not going to be as good as some people are projecting. They're certainly not the second best unit in the NFL, as Pro Football Focus rated them this week. And I know that they use metrics, and I know that I have, that's not a knock of PFF. I respect what they do and the methods that they use, but I think that's ridiculous. It's a premise that, and ridiculous is probably too strong. Let me rephrase that because I have to be careful. I think that that's giving them a lot more credit than I would at this stage of their development, because I don't think the Bears have the second best anything in the NFL right now, because they're coming off 14 losses, and the new guys are so reliant on the help around them that, to me, that's overrating the position group.
See, PFF could have been a candidate this week for what you doing, man.
Yeah.
Because I don't know what they were doing there. But like $72 million to Tremaine Edmonds on a 4-year deal, based largely on their belief that his length makes a difference to what they do, is a heavy investment, and it's a gamble, and it's something they've got to get the most out of. We know that the ball production there has not been there for Tremaine Edmonds. He hasn't had high volume splash play totals in his career. And so what you're going to have to do is measure his production. And then you're just going to have to see whether his presence creates production for the entirety of the defense, whether it's tip passes that get intercepted, or, pressures that result in an interception, or whatever it may be. You better feel Tremaine Edmonds not only on an every week basis, but really on an every quarter basis, because that's what you paid him to be for you. And really, I probably you'd probably have to circle all the way back to Brian Urlacher to have a linebacker that is here in the building that you expect that much of. Am I stretching there?
I think that I really think that, even though he's an easy guy to criticize now, I guess, for a lot of people, but I mean, Roquan Smith had heavy expectations. He wasn't physically the same body type. He wasn't certainly, long and lean and athletic, but I think Roquan Smith assumed that leadership mantle as much as any linebacker had since Urlacher. And I think that he had the ability to back it up. And we're talking about a Pro Bowl caliber, all pro caliber linebacker in Roquan Smith. It's just that, for reasons that we've litigated and re-legislated, I think he's not here any longer. But I do think that probably overlooks him a little bit. But beyond that, I think you're onto something.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just from the context for me of, like, when Urlacher was at his peak, you just knew that whenever the Bears needed to play, that you were going to get it. At some point in that drive, at some point in that quarter, he was going to step forward. Obviously, the greatest example ever is the Arizona game on Monday night in 2006. But and that was a question with Roquan for the first few years. Is the production's there. Yeah, those tackle numbers look great when the stats come out on Monday. But when I watched the game, I didn't feel you all the time. And that's what you're paying Tremaine Edmonds to be, is somebody that the opposing offense feels at all times, and then by extension, those of us who are watching the game go, man, that guy's everywhere.
And that's why I think that I'm hesitant to elevate that group too quickly, because I think in Buffalo, he did not have those kind of numbers, but also in Buffalo, he was successful largely because, or at least in part because of the defense around him, in front of him, that helped make him the linebacker he became. And in baseball, I would liken it to, if you pay big money for a closer that's capable of 40 saves. Well, you know what? You got to get a lead. And if you have lousy starting pitching, an all-star closer is not going to do you a lot of good. Likewise, in the Bears context, if you have a Pro Bowl caliber, very expensive middle linebacker, great. He looks great in pads, and he's going to make all sorts of plays, but will he really be able to do what you need him to do at the highest level if you don't have your defensive line, and that's why I felt like if you're going to spend on a deep middle linebacker, you could risk overpaying for an edge rusher if somebody's out there you feel like could be a help round out your defensive front.
Sure, no question about it. All right, we'll move over to cornerback now, and I think this one's easy, at least from my perspective. My biggest question, and this is a big one. It's got Sharpie around the outline of the question mark. It's what's next for Jalen Johnson, and I think we've obviously documented over the last 4 or 5 weeks that he's heading into a contract year, final year of his rookie deal. A guy who has shown flashes of promise through his first 3 years in the league, believes very highly in where his career is headed, and yet the Bears have to figure out how they value him and where his ball production may come from going forward, and what this looks like. At this point, nobody has publicly said that there's any sort of strains in the relationship, and I don't get any sense behind the scenes that there are. But Jalen Johnson is at a pivotal point in his career, and so what's next for him is a fascinating 17 game case study that's going to unfold in front of us really soon.
I think that's a good call. And if I'm Jalen Johnson and you're looking at this season ahead of you, I definitely think you're looking at it as a prove it year. I think that I would approach it that contractually speaking, those things will take care of themselves. I wouldn't give my contract a second thought. I thought his rhetoric, at least at the mini camp or the OTAs when he returned, was the right tone to set.
Yeah.
He should not be thinking contract. He should be thinking establishing himself as a top half of the league cornerback. In his mind, if he wants to think he could be a top 10 cornerback, then great. That's what you want to do. The details will come later if he's able to back that up on the field, on tape, and make an impact on Sunday.
Jalen Johnson to me is like he's one of these guys that sort of represents the struggles in Chicago of processing the whole league, if that makes sense, because he feels like one of the better players on this roster. Well, it's a 14-loss roster. And when then you watch championship football teams, you say, okay, how good would he be on the best defense in the league? And how good would he be if he had better supporting cast around him? Would he be better? And it's one of those things where, I think there's a tendency to believe that the guys that are in your city are better than they really are because that's all you're watching and you're not seeing the whole thing. And so I'm very curious to see where he goes in 2023. Look, I've been fascinated with the 2020 draft class since they got in here. That's a group that also includes Gibson, Cole Kmet, Darnell Mooney. This was a group that was stuck in the COVID era, right? Like they didn't get rookie camp. They didn't get OTAs and mini camp. They didn't get a normal training camp. And so their introduction into the NFL was very abnormal. And all of those guys really were pretty impressive at the way they made immediate emergences, despite the handicaps against them to having that normal orientation. And so this is a different point now for Jalen in his career to see if he can meet this moment as well.
If I said to you, rank the cornerbacks in order of the kind of season they will have in 2023, and I said Jalen Johnson, Kyler Gordon, and Tyreek Stevenson, how would you rank them? Is it a foregone conclusion in your mind that Jalen Johnson will be number one on that list? Does he have to be for the Bears defense to be successful?
Yes and yes, I think, in my opinion. Look, I have significant belief in Tyreek Stevenson after watching him for a month. I'm really interested to watch him get out at training camp and getting some one-on-ones and have those daily tests where you get beat 2 or 3 times and then you have to see how you respond. That's going to be a test for Tyreek Stevenson for sure. He's got all the physical gifts that say, man, this guy looks the part, particularly for this defense. That'll be fascinating. But I think, I think Jalen's got to be your number one just because he's established. He's going to be playing outside. Kyler Gordon will be in the slot. And you just need him to be a difference maker, and that's what he wants to be paid like. So go make a difference.
So, does durability concern you at all when it comes to Jalen Johnson because of his injury situation last year that prevented him from having or playing a full season? And I don't want to overstate that,
Yeah.
but like you want to have your eyes wide open. I do think you're right when you talk about in Chicago, like many sports cities, we tend to overvalue players or put them on a level before they actually reach that
well, and it's just because they're on bad teams, and it's just hard to gauge in that regard. But I don't have a ton of concern about his durability. He's a tough dude, and he played through some stuff earlier in the year. They shut him down toward the end of the year because they were clearly in a mode of let's shut everyone down and let's get out of here with a bunch of losses and
let's lose,
move on.
Yeah,
and so Jalen, I think he was shut down right before Christmas, if I'm not mistaken, to miss the last few games. And so, yeah, I think he'll be fine durability wise. It's just a matter of now, can you be the difference maker that you want to be seen as?
How about safety? Any questions about the
I
safety
do.
position?
So my question that I wrote down is I'll amend it, but my question that I wrote down is where is the depth? For the sake of this discussion, I'll ask you. Name me four safeties on. Can you name me four safeties on the Bears roster?
Wow. Well, they still have. Well, I know the two starters with Brisker and Eddie Jackson. The kid from Cal who was drafted in seventh round last year still around, right? Hicks.
Yep.
And so that's three. I think the DHC is still on the street somewhere, about ready to, be called back into some NFL camp. My sense is that he's only a phone call away, but he's not on the roster now. I'd really have to do some research here, Dan, because off the top of my head, nobody jumps off the page or come to the front of my
Yeah.
my brain.
We went Eddie Jackson, Jaquan Brisker, the kid from Cal.
Yeah,
I mean that's the answer to the question, right? Where's the depth? Because you do have Elijah Hicks from Cal, and he's a guy that I'm curious to watch and see if he can take the next step in year two. They used another late day 3 pick on Kendall Williamson from Stanford
that
in
guy.
April. Yeah, that guy as well, right? There's
A Stanford guy.
Adrian Colbert's on the roster. You got Braylon Trahan and a bunch of other guys that'll be taking reps back there. But man, like if there is durability problems at safety, all of a sudden you go from a starting duo that you believe strongly in Eddie Jackson and Jaquan Brisker to, oh God, now what, right? And Eddie Jackson obviously coming back from a Liz Frank injury. Also, don't keep an eye on this. This is at least worth mentioning. I love Jaquan Brisker, but Jaquan Brisker suffered 2 concussions in the same game in Atlanta and then was out for 3 weeks, in the dark, literally for multiple weeks as he came back from a concussion. And for guys that play like Jaquan Brisker plays, those things can add up quickly. And so that was not an insignificant little injury in November. It's something to keep on the front burner because Jaquan Brisker is one of the most fearless, most aggressive hitters and players that you're going to find in the league. He has a bright future, but those types of things are all married together, particularly in the 2023 version of the NFL.
So do you think this comes up when the Bears discuss these depth issues? Do you think that because they are first on the list of teams that can claim players on waivers, that they look at edge rusher and they think, well, all you got to do is you could sign a guy on a Tuesday and put him in the huddle on a Sunday, and he's still going to be able to get to the quarterback. By the same token, in this defense, free safety is not exactly, going to be a difficult concept to grasp. Deep is the deepest, wide is the widest. You play in the hash, and I mean there are a lot of other things that go into it. But if Eddie Jackson goes down, I think maybe theoretically, do they feel like they can claim somebody and plug and play? Whereas because they don't have any obvious answer, and it has surprised me that you got a guy coming back from a serious injury like that. They're not really protected against the fact that he could have some sort of step back or setback in his health and not be available.
Yeah, and it's not a question that we've really dug into much with the people up there. And so when we get back in July and into early August and start talking again to Matt Eberflus and Alan Williams and their secondary coaches, it'll be interesting to kind of get their take on what they're doing with the safety position and how they can kind of cultivate depth without having to rely on, by the way, we can claim someone the instant they're let go somewhere else. I don't remember what the number was. You might be able to correct me on this from things that you've talked about on the air, but wasn't it like 6 guys that they claimed after the 53 man roster was initially
6 roster
set
spots
before they played
in
in week
NFL
1?
high. They had more than any other team. That's why, Dan, we could spend all off season breaking down the rosters, projecting the 53, and then 47 through 53 are going to be guys who you have to Google on the Monday after final cut down.
Yep, Labor Day, always the who are these guys edition of the roster. And so I mean, look, like this is going to be really fascinating to see where they go there. Again, like I'll reiterate that at full strength, Eddie Jackson and Jaquan Brisker have a chemistry and a proven track record of being able to have impacts on games. Both played really well last year, particularly at the start of the year when they were both together. Now it's a matter of keeping them together and keeping them healthy so that you don't have to answer those questions down the depth chart and go looking for mugshots and bios and everything else to figure out who that is that just came on the field.
All right. Any other defensive questions before we wrap up the defensive portion of the conversation?
No, that's every position. And I think we illuminated there that there are significant questions, and that is to be expected for a team that finished last place and worst record in the league last year.
I have one more defensive question for you before we change gears. Do you think that Noah Sewell will challenge Jack Sanborn, who missed the minicamp because of an injury? Do you think that the rookie could supplant the second year, fan favorite at strong side linebacker, even though it's not a position that you're going to see more than half of the time?
That's going to be a training camp storyline to watch for sure. Jack Sanborn, remember, had his rookie season cut short late in the year due to injury and hasn't been back practicing since. And so it wasn't just the mini camp he missed the whole offseason program on the field, the OTAs. And so their expectation is that he will be 100% full go and green lit when training camp starts next month. And Matt Eberflus said that he will be your number one in that position, but Sewell will be challenging, and they obviously used a draft pick on him with the expectation that, hey, we want you to become something for our football team, and so how quickly he can get it is certainly worth keeping an eye on.
So, okay, I have a couple questions left then for you. So, when you talk about position battles that are unresolved after the final minicamp practice last week, is that one at the top of the list? I really don't think that center is a position battle, even though they
No.
may want to claim that Cody Whitehair and Lucas Patrick are battling and even whatever. Cody Whitehair is going to make $9.9 million unless he's cut, and I don't think they're going to cut him. So that to me is the starting center. I don't know any other positional battles. Maybe running back. Could that be a bigger one?
Well, I would say running back, and then I would say whatever you're doing down the depth chart at receiver, like how is this going to shake out? 3, 4, 5, 6, and obviously we know the injuries with Claypool and Mooney and how those may factor into things. But those are certainly the running back battle is going to be one that we'll start to get a better look at once they're able to actually do some running, which is not really allowed during the offseason program because
I think we'll save the fierce Tyler Scott versus Velus Jones Jr. debate for another day.
Perfect. We got offense next week, so just save it for there, and
let's do it that.
We'll rock and roll.
Speaking of offense, and maybe we can address this more next week, but I did want to ask your impressions because you've been out there all throughout the offseason, the OTAs and the minicamp. And then last week after the minicamp, there was a report from our friends at AM 1000, Mark Silverman, said that Chase Claypool has run afoul of, or I forget how it was worded, but the Bears are unhappy with him, either his availability or his attitude or a combination of both. But Sylvie's report left the suggestion that Claypool was somebody who has fallen a little bit out of favor. Have you heard similar things, and how much credence should people put in that in terms of worrying about Claypool, who's facing a very big year for him contractually and otherwise?
Yeah, I'll try to put this as directly as I can. There were 0 parts of that report that surprised me. There were 0 parts of that report that I would take umbrance with. I think that you have a guy that the Bears want more out of. You have a guy that the Bears understand what they traded away to get, and they would like him to be on the practice field in the spring, developing timing and rapport with his quarterback. They would like him to be producing on game days like he didn't a year ago, as he was obviously learning the offense and trying to find his way around, and then obviously getting hurt a little bit, and then Justin getting hurt and all that continuity disrupted. But this is not an investment where you can just shrug and go, oh, well, didn't work out. I mean, you gave away the number 32 overall pick for a guy that you expected to be part of your offense for more than 15 months. You don't trade the number 32 overall pick for a 15-month rental of a last place team. And so yes, they expect a lot more out of them. Yes, they have spoken about the challenges that they want to put forth with Chase Claypool. There have been conversations about retaining emotional equilibrium through the ups and downs of an NFL season and making sure that your very real passion is used in the right way. So look, like I go into training camp having a ton of questions about Chase Claypool, none of them having been answered in the spring for the 6 practices we were out to see, and having no real confidence that he is going to be the player that, as we've talked about previously, that I think he thinks he is.
Do you think there's some element of the Bears that, number one, not terribly unhappy that such a report or even a rumor, if it's unfounded, is out there because of the pressure it places on Claypool to maybe prove some people wrong? And then it makes me wonder about perhaps if that may have originated from somebody with that intent. You never quite know in the NFL, but it did cross my mind when you have somebody as hard to figure right right now as Chase Claypool because of all the reasons you've articulated. But I wonder if they're not that unhappy that this kind of thing is out there.
Yeah, I don't think they're happy or unhappy with it. I think that they know the direct challenges that they've put on Chase Claypool's plate, and they are hoping that he responds to them. We'll see. We'll get 6.5 weeks of training camp leading up to the regular season to see how much he practices, to see how he looks during practice, to see if he's able to, again, retain that emotional equilibrium that we've talked about multiple times, and figure out a way to become a positive force in an offense that needs positive forces. Because, oh, by the way, this offense was a bit of a mess last year outside of the ad lib Justin Fields runs that came in a flurry here and there.
Okay, those are all the football thoughts I have for today while I try to process this Chris Paul trade. So what else we want to get to, because I think you have something you want to get off your chest, and I want to give a shout out to a Take the North listener that stopped me this week and had some nice things to say about the pod.
All right, I'll start with two things, a shout out, and then I want to pick your brain on something from the youth baseball front. So get ready to have like a 4-minute youth baseball discussion with me. The 10U Glenview Royals did win the championship on Saturday, the day before Father's Day, a 6-4 win over the Orioles in the title game. I can tell you, as a dad, being in that moment in a really fun environment, that was a cool moment there to watch our team, which was the best all year, by the way. And I talked about it after the draft. I said we walked out of the yard house after the draft in April, and I looked at our roster and said, this is going to be hard for this team to beat. I was right, David. So congrats to that group of boys
I forgot that moment.
It was the most united group of kids that I've ever been around. And that's like a really, really fun thing to.
Sounds like a movie.
To have. I'm telling you, the parents after the championship game, we were all just talking about how lucky we all got to have that group to come together. And then again, a 6-4 win, which ended with a strikeout of a really good hitter with one of the best hitters in the league on deck with basically the tying run at the plate. That tell you a little bit about the pressure. And my son told me, he goes, Dad, I couldn't breathe on that last pitch. And then I started to get tears in my eyes. I said, all right, that's how I know you're mine. The paternity test can be canceled because you're emotional in the big moments. So congrats there. So the other part. So now I move you over to the travel scene. We played a game last night back on a field in Park Ridge where I played when I was 9 and 10 years old. And I never complain about umpires, David, ever. I'm going to come on the podcast and complain about umpires. I really respect the job these people do. It's a thankless job. I typically try to learn their names and thank them when the game's over. We had a guy last night against a team that we probably weren't going to beat anyway. I give them all the credit in the world because they're a much better team than us. But he had a strike zone the size of an envelope. And then he was trying to stir up conflict every time we asked him where the pitch was. And it got really tense really quick. And I'm just really curious how you would respond to this, because I went and ran the numbers this morning from the Game Changer app. This team scored against us. They scored 11 runs in the first inning on 3 hits, 2 ground ball singles and a line drive, which tells you that there were a lot of walks, and a lot of walks that had the old coaches in the dugout scratching their head and maybe making a couple comments. I looked it up this morning. The other team that we played, the Park Ridge team, swung at 2 of the first 36 pitches in the first inning.
Only 2?
2 of the first 36. They were either balls or called strikes, and they were just sitting with the bat on their shoulder. It was the first time I ever felt like there's something weird about this whole thing. And I don't normally bring that up, and I'm probably going to get skewered for it. But
okay, I would not go to the guy directly. I would not go to the umpire directly. I would go to whoever is the commissioner of the league or the umpires association, if you have such a thing. And I would just ask them what you would do with this information and make them aware.
So the umpire was pushing back, and he was saying, I'm calling it consistently. And we're like, well, it's consistently bad. And then he would respond back with, this is 10U baseball. And we're like, yeah, that's the point. That's why you give a little bit of leniency with your strike zone, so you don't have 9 kids in the field with their thumbs up their butt for 36 pitches where only 2 are swung at. The game was over quickly, and we ended up getting beat in 4 innings. But it's just one of those things where, what are we doing? This is, let the kids play.
On-base percentage shouldn't be a thing in 10 and under baseball.
Gross. So thank you for letting me get that off my chest.
And neither should robot umps. I would not recommend the GoFundMe page for robot umps.
I was going to say, you want me to take that down? I put that up this morning.
You're going to have to take that down. I worried about that because I thought, is this related to your gripes about the umpiring? So take down the GoFundMe page for robot umpires, and I would take it to a highest level and kind of go around him in case he has some sinister motives. Maybe somebody was buying him one of those an ice cream cone or something afterward. I'm not
Somebody's
sure.
going to have to check the geolocations on all the DraftKings and FanDuel bets that were placed on that game last night, right? I mean, that's the surest way to figure out what was happening there.
Oh boy, yeah, that's fun. Well, good luck solving that riddle. That's a good one. I'm glad I don't have to deal with that stuff anymore. That's a part about youth sports I do not miss. Although there are other things. Wanted to give a shout out to a good listener. Stopped me at a pro shop, a golf shop the other day. He is Jeffrey Zerwitz is a regular listener of the Take the North podcast, and says he loves the Bears, loves hearing us talk about the Bears. I asked him if it bothered him that you were grumpy all the time. He said no.
I'm not.
No, I know. I'm just kidding. But a good listener and a good guy. And so if you want any personal golf lessons that I think.
What were you doing at the golf shop?
Exchanging golf balls I wasn't perfecting my swing. I'm not a big golfer, but my mom had bought somebody some golf balls, and she asked me to exchange them because she bought the wrong color of golf balls. So I had a box of yellow golf balls, and she wanted white.
Okay. Well, so, at least it gave you an opportunity to meet Jeffrey, and
did.
Hopefully Jeffrey's listening here. I hope we get a little bit, look, like we're coming up now on our year anniversary of the pod, and hopefully our listener involvement can grow here in year two. It's been a fun run to this point.
Yeah, I would like to take as many questions as possible, because but they all start to sound alike. But we should solicit some more. But they're all about Justin Fields. Everybody wants to talk about Justin Fields, which we didn't even talk about this time. So that's actually progress. Next time we'll talk about Justin Fields.
But you got that wrong. Everybody wants to talk about Justin Fields until they don't want to talk about Justin Fields, because what you're telling them isn't what they want to hear, and then they don't want to talk about it anymore, and they say it's just June.
That's interesting. We have a question on the Mully and Haugh show that came up this morning that we're going to address in detail tomorrow, about the most inaccurate narrative in Chicago sports. And there's some element of me that wonders if it involves the Bears' progression or expected improvement, let's say, in 2023. And that's something that's probably worth exploring at some point on the pod.
I'm going to tune into what you guys say on Mully and Haugh, and then we'll figure out how we can expand on it from there.
That's good. That's a good answer, Dan. That's a good answer. Anything else that we have forgotten or overlooked? There's a couple other things we can wait until next time. Stadium thing I want to get to next time. I think the stadium issue and how Chicago may be trying to get back into the picture, or maybe stay in the picture, I think we should probably look at a little bit deeper next time. So we'll wrap things up now for the Take the North podcast. You can catch us on the free Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can find Dan's work on chicagotribune.com, and you can listen to what I have to say about the Bears and everything else, including all those crazy NBA trades, on the Mully and Haugh show, 5:30 to 10 on 670 The Score. For Adam Sadzinski and Dan Wiederer, I'm David Haugh. Thank you for listening to the Take North podcast.
Great talk. See you out there.